Hey guys.
Hi. We're so glad that you guys watched our introduction video, and now we're going to start getting into some actual content. Now remember, it's completely okay to pause, rewind, go back, and really take your time with these videos. The point of this is to make sure you understand the content to your absolute best. Now, a couple of features that you're going to see in every single video. Okay? First of all, you'll see our chapter and section. So if you want to follow along in your textbook, you have the title and the page number to do so. Today we're going to be in chapter 1, what does a historian do? And we're going to be answering the question in section 1, what is history? And this is a really big idea, and it matters because, and we'll see that right down there every time. In this case, events of the past created the world that we lived in today, and knowing about history can help us make better decisions about the future. Remember, we expect all of your notes to be completely filled in before you turn them in on the day that we've assigned them. So please be sure before you get to class that you check them for completeness and correctness.
Well, hello, historians. This is Mr. Green. I am here to talk to you about why we study history. As you can see, this is a slide with a cartoon. A cartoon has a teacher. He's saying blah, 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 pointing at the board that says history, leading you to believe that it is about a teacher teaching history. Then you have a student in the audience. He is looking up at his little think bubble, and it says, "What's this got to do with me?" Ha ha ha. You see, it's funny because it's how you feel on the inside and how I look on the outside. I will pause for a moment and allow you time to laugh. Okay, now let's proceed. So why do we study history? Well, in your notes, one of the first things that we need to identify is what is history. History is the study of people and events of the past. That is what history is. History, to become history, has to be documented, has to be written, has to be a story, something that has evidence, whether it's artifacts, written record. That is what makes up history. Us studying these people, these events from the past through artifacts or written documents. So make sure you have these notes written down, and the underlined words are very, very important. So why do we study or explain? It also explains why things are the way that they are. So why, for instance, why is America such a melting pot of culture and of different ethnicities and different backgrounds? Well, if you look at history, there's a long story of like hundreds of stories that kind of answer that question, those questions. Why is everything the way that it is? For instance, think about this. Why is Batman called Batman? Why is Batman called Batman? Have you ever thought about that? Well, if you look into the background of his story, if you look into his story or her story, you know, either one. If you look into the story of Batman, you will find out that Batman was attacked by bats when he was a child. He fell into a cave and was attacked by bats as a child, leading him to have an elevated level of fear of bats. Now, later on, he decided to overcome that fear. He needs to become the fear. Then he could overcome it. That's how he became Batman. Knowledge. I will wait for the wow. Okay. Now, so also to study history, we learn about things that have happened in the past. We learned about mistakes made. We learned about things that have been accomplished, so we understand why things are the way that they are, why things are the way that they are. So that's another reason why we study history. Let me see. There is a little bit of a cartoon. I will pause for a minute and let you read it. It's just there to give you a visual, give you an explanation of what I just said. It's that we learn from these past. We learn from the past. We learn from these mistakes, from these accomplishments, things that we've done. And it helps us to make decisions for the future. For instance, why do certain civilizations crumble? Well, when we know the reasonings behind these crumblings, or when I say crumble, it means fall apart, they failed. We know the reasons, and we know what we can do as a civilization to kind of avoid the same pitfalls. Oh, it also helps us understand how we fit into the human story. What is it that we can accomplish as humans, how we can contribute to society? What can we do as human beings to contribute to society? What impact could we possibly have on the world? Well, to understand that, you need to look at the impacts that others have had on the world. Then you could better understand how the human can definitely have a significant impact in this world.
So now that we know a little bit more about why we study history, let's talk about how we study history. When we talk about history, we have different ways of dividing time up into units. Now, a lot of these we're familiar with, like seconds or minutes, but in history, we tend to work with bigger units of time. And we have some hand motions to help you guys remember what these bigger units of time are. We're going to start off with about the smallest unit that we have, which is a decade. Now, when we say decade, we're going to hold up 10 hands, or 10 fingers rather, just like we see in the picture on your screen. A decade is 10 years, so we'll say decade. Now, if we wanted to talk about a little bit larger units of time than that, because sometimes as historians, we don't know the exact year or decade, we might talk about a century or 100 years. Now, 100 is 10 times 10. So we're going to see century. 10 times 10 is 100 years. Now, let's imagine we want to go even larger than that. We might talk about a millennium or 1,000 years. And when we talk about a millennium, we talk about 10 times 10 times 10 years. So we say millennium. So let's practice those again. A decade is 10 years. A century is 100 years, or century, 10 times 10. A millennium is 1,000 years. Millennium. And remember, that's 10 times 10 times 10. Now, sometimes we don't know exactly when something happened, but we kind of are able to get it to a general era. And an era is a long period of time, okay, or a large period of time. It's a measure of time that we might be familiar with as like the ancient era. We talk about the ancient world, things that happened thousands of millennia ago or thousands of years ago. Maybe we talk about the medieval era, the era of knights and castles and battles. Or maybe we even talk about the modern era with computers and technology that we're more familiar with. All of these don't necessarily have a set start date and end date, but they do have a long period of time in which we can talk about those eras, a long period of time. And one more word, which we haven't talked about yet, and isn't on our notes, but we'll talk more about, is that when we're not sure when something happened, we say circa or about. Something happened around a period of time. And we'll talk more about that soon. Now, since now we have a basic vocabulary of how we talk about time, Ms. Hodges is going to introduce us to the ways in which we can visualize time or make a graphic of it.
All right, so Ms. Todrick introduced you to some vocabulary words that help you understand how time is measured. And we can measure time also in a variety of different ways in smaller or larger increments. If we want to talk about just what we're doing today, we talk about it in terms of minutes, just minutes and hours, just like we would on a clock. But we might want to talk about what are we going to do in the next couple of days. So we might think about what we want to plan to get to your birthday if it were next week or something like that. But sometimes we need to plan out even further, and we need to talk about things that happen over a long period of time, talking about many years altogether. And that's kind of what we want to cover now. We've talked about the words that you would use, decade, century, millennium, and then a long period of time, an era. But how would we put all those together, and how would we know exactly what we're talking about? So historians came up with an idea, a way to do that, and it's called a timeline. We lay events out on a timeline in the order that they happened. So we talk about things that happened before of an event or things that happened after an event. In this case, we are talking about things that happened before Jesus Christ was born or after Jesus Christ was born. So BC means before Christ. You can see that on the video and on your notes, so you want to fill that in. And then there's AD on the other side, and that's after Christ was born, in the year of our Lord. So AD means Anno Domini, in the year of our Lord, after the birth of Christ. Now this would be a good spot to pause, write that down, and take care of that. So pause the video and take a moment and fill that out. All right, welcome back. So now that you're back, you might want to look at the top line. We're talking about when baby Jesus was born. So we're going to put him right there. So events that happened before baby Jesus, if you notice, the numbers are getting bigger as they go away from the center. And they're also getting bigger as they go away from the center the other way. And historians decided that they wanted to include everybody in the discussion of when events happened. So we have two ways to discuss before Christ. One, we can talk about before, so before Jesus was born, before the common era when everybody was together, or we can talk about the common era, just when everybody was there, that big common time when everybody was together. And so we look at these things and we can measure out time. Historians place events on timelines so we know what's going on in one country while something else is going on in another country. And then we can put all these times together and we get a big picture of the world. It's almost if we looked at what happened before you were born and after you were born. There were events that happened before you were born, obviously. People were here, your family was here. But after you were born, your family is different. And that's what we're looking at with a timeline, only on a large scale. We're not just looking at what happened before one person was born. We're looking at one individual person. We're measuring it before little baby Jesus was born. But we're looking at everything in the world that happened before that and everything that happened after that. So that's a timeline. And this is a confusing concept, and we'll spend more time on it in class. But for right now, make sure your notes are complete. Make sure you have all that you need, and come prepared with your questions. Write them on the side, and we'll get to them soon.
So now that you've learned why we study history and the time measuring tools used, let's talk about how we actually know what happened in the past. So historians use many different clues to teach us about the past. Before handwriting was invented, there were two specific tools used to learn about people and things of the past. The first is known as an artifact. Now, an artifact is an object made by people. This could be a building, a house, jewelry, arrowheads, weapons. Anything that a command could make in the past is known as an artifact. Now, I want you to pause the video and draw or list two specific examples on your notes of what an artifact looks like. Take as much time as you need, and when you're done, come back so we can talk about the second tool historians used. Great! So the second tool historians used to learn about our past is known as a fossil. Now, a fossil is the remains of plants and animal life that have been preserved from an earlier time. Okay, so this could be something like an impression of an animal footprint. This could be an insect stuck in amber. So, again, I would like you to pause the video and draw or list two specific examples of what a fossil might look like. When you are done, I have a fun little fact for you. Okay, great. So actually, did you know that paleontologists are scientists who study fossils? And then archaeologists are the ones who study artifacts. Just thought you should know that.
All right, guys, we are almost through this packet. You've worked really hard, and I'm so proud of you. At the bottom, you can see there's a hot question on your notes. And our hot question this time is name one example of how the past influences our life today. And Mr. Green talked about that on his slide, about how we can look at the past and make decisions for the future and for our lives. So what we want you to do is answer the HOT question. Now, a HOT question is a higher order thinking question, H-O-T. And what that means is you take all the information you've learned, you process it in your little brain, and you come out with why it matters and why we need to know this. So what we want is your thoughts, and we want to know what you think about this, and we want to see how you're moving forward and growing and learning about history and becoming a better historian, because that's what we're trying to do. So we'd like for you to answer your higher order thinking. That's the last part that you have to do on these notes. Now, I know you all want full credit, and I know you've worked really hard, and we want to give you full credit for all of your work. So look back through, make sure you've filled in every blank and you've answered every question. Go back through the video and look again and see if there's anything you need to complete. And if it's all complete, if you're proud of it, we cannot wait to see your answers on your higher order thinking. So congratulations on your first lit video. Thank you so much for your time and effort, and we will see you in history. Bye, guys.
Bye.